Thanks for listening to the Something in the Wilderness podcast. My name's Steve, and today we picked a fan favorite song from Andrew McMahon's catalog that goes back a ways. In fact, I think it's safe to say this is one of the originals. Recently, today's guest reached out to me online and we connected over our passion for Andrew McMahon lyrics and the spirit of the music in general and how it impacts us. I'm pleased to introduce you to Troy Campbell, a professor and a creative who uses Andrew lyrics to inspire his art and to teach his students in the fields of psychology, philosophy, and more. Welcome to the show, Troy.
Hi, Steve. I'm very excited to be here. I study emotion. I study fandom. I love Andrew, so I like this. Love listening to your episodes.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. So, tell us a little bit more about that. Introduce yourself to the listeners.
Hi, here's probably a little bit of a long intro, but hi, my name is Troy Campbell, and I generally have this orientation I call scientific mind, artistic heart. And so some of that comes a lot from being a behavioral science PhD. So there's some hard science in there, stuff used by people like Adam Grant, the Obama administration, but also stuff that is, my dissertation was in part on how people enjoy poetry. I translate a lot of that research on feelings, on storytelling in the classroom, where I share a lot of Andrew lyrics, and I have my students write their own lyrics and have found that really powerful. And then beyond the university, I apply that science in three different ways. One is experiential design, so working for Disney Imagineering, emotions plus the art of experience design, Netflix, choice overload emotions plus aesthetics, storytelling and brand, so working for companies like Blizzard on understanding what is their big story, how do they bring this to the world, and then also helping companies inside, so culture, be more creative. So working with people like Nike people and helping the designers in the sneaker labs be more creative by having them go through story experiences, giving them daily improv activities, and also working with them to understand inspiration through writing song lyrics. I love also Andrew because he's so relevant to everything that I've done, from fandom to emotions to writing to storytelling. There's a bit of his inspiration in a lot of what I do.
Awesome. So you contract with these companies to help them out?
Yeah, so I'm the chief scientist at a creative firm called On Your Feet. Mm-hmm. And we have a long-standing relationship with lots of different companies, such as Disney, Nike, Blizzard. And they contact us when they have different needs, and then we perform whatever they need. And what we do is lots of different things. So sometimes it's experiential design, sometimes it's story and brand, and sometimes it's culture. And then I also work individually on my own, sometimes outside of On Your Feet.
Okay, and you've mentioned that you teach in addition to all that, right?
So I was a professor at the University of Oregon for a while, and right now I'm teaching classes in the San Luis Obispo area where I live, because my partner got a job out there. But I am taking a break from being a full-time academic. Still teaching some classes here and there, still doing some academic research, but sort of taking a break to go out more in the world and apply this stuff, and then sort of also honestly wait for academia to evolve a little bit. So people like you and Steve, please, Steve, please move academia forward. And then I want to come back to a world of academia and where I feel like it can be a place where I'm totally happy, where I feel as if the system is actually helping the students. And, I'd be teaching students about how to apply song lyrics or write song lyrics. And they were like juniors in college and they hadn't really been properly taught how to write a topic sentence. And that really sort of frustrated me individually, but also just frustrated me for them. I'm like, we haven't served our students in the way that we should. And I'd like the system to become a little bit better so I can integrate with it better.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Actually, I really like that scientific, what did you call it? Scientific mind, artistic heart?
Yeah, scientific mind, artistic heart, combining the functional rigidity and precision of science with the abstractness and expression, and then, of course, the techniques of art.
That's something that really jumped out at me when I went to your website and checked it out. So you said that you've used lyrics to teach students, and you've used Andrew McMahon lyrics specifically, right?
Yep, all the time. So the simplest way of using Andrew McMahon is great at bottling an emotion and experience, right? So I'll just lots of times say lyrics, usually citing Andrew, but probably there's times where I'm just stealing his lyrics. Usually I cite it, but one time I said, "It won't be long until your highs become your lows," right? It's a line from Catching Fire. Mm-hmm. I was describing something about how emotions change over time and how set points change and you habituate to things. And one of my students was just so blown away by that realization because it helped him not only just understand how to design for his audience, but himself, like how he was feeling as he had just had dreams come true, but then wasn't continually happy. And so he made me a piece of artwork at the end of the year that just so happened to be musically themed. He put it on a record and wrote highs and lows. And he said, I literally haven't heard anything this year that moved me so much. And I was like, well, let me tell you a story about where that came from. And so that's just a really, really easy way to use lyrics. And there's lots of others as well.
Okay, wow. That's a great example, though. I love that, where the student internalized it, took it home, and actually came back and produced something as a way to show that what he learned. So that was great.
Yeah. And if you just think about it from like what you said, scientific mind, artistic heart standing out to you, is that science can really define the emotion, but the songs are really what makes people fully understand it. I think there's this misconception that you can read a study about a psychological phenomenon, and just because you read about an experiment and have now a definition, you really understand what that means. And you just need artistic expansions on most of the stuff to understand it. And Andrew is, so good. We'll talk about Cavanaugh Park, about how it relates to, loneliness and social psychological themes, things like identity. I also teach design, and he's also really good at helping teach design lessons. So his real specificity in lyrics, his aesthetic distinctness, like for instance, he doesn't say blue, he says dark blue. Mm-hmm. And when I was working with Netflix, we were talking about all these ideas of using very specific shades of colors to actually signal. And so it's literally using the same ideas. Like if you go on the Netflix platform now, they use different shades of black. And by doing that, they don't make it looks aesthetically good, but something will actually stand out to you, and your brain will automatically think, or usually think, oh, that's where I should pay attention, or this thing is higher ranked or more important socially right now because it's in this shade of black versus this shade of black. Yeah, it's amazing how useful a artist can be. And of course, I'm actually usually in class asking them to tell me your favorite artists. So they're like, Megan Thee Stallion does this. And I'm like, oh yeah, she does do that, right? I'm a Savage and we can talk about that song and things like that.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I was in a psychology class back in high school, and I took a lot of psychology classes in my undergrad as well. But in high school, I remember my brother took psychology, and he had this song where they analyzed song lyrics, and they had to rewrite the lyrics in the way in what it meant to them. And I was really looking forward to getting to that class so that I could do the same project. And she never gave it to us. She never gave us that assignment.
Oh, that's yeah.
I like to think I have this podcast now to fulfill that need that I had for that one assignment that I thought about for 2 years in high school that I thought I was going to do. Now I do it here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
Need fulfilled. The song we're talking about today, I think it gives a lot of us Andrew McMahon fans some feelings of nostalgia and memories of being younger. I didn't hear this song when I was a teenager. I was older than a teenager when I first heard this song, but it still takes me back to my teenage years because of the lyrics, though, because of what he's talking about. He's talking about being a teenager, and I feel that sense of freedom, that sense of discovery from back when I was a teenager, and that's one thing I love about this song. I think about those good times I had with friends, driving around, maybe getting into some trouble, but just being in a car with my friends, listening to music, hanging out at the park at night, maybe being in some places we shouldn't have been at night, going to the coffee shop. We hung out at a lot of coffee shops back then, that sort of thing. Andrew stated that this is the oldest song of his that still gets played in concert to this day. He wrote it when he was 15 or 16 years old. The song is, as you mentioned, Cavanaugh Park. It's by Something Corporate. It was originally recorded as track 7 on Ready Break, which came out on November 4th, 2000. It was later re-recorded as track 7 again on Leaving Through the Window, released on May 21st, 2002. It was featured on Played in Space, a mostly greatest hits of sorts, released in 2010. Out of all those places, how did you, Troy, first come across this song?
So I came across Andrew McMahon just sort of in high school when everybody was listening to all this emo stuff, and I had actually not given Andrew McMahon the shot because I'd actually heard If You See Jordan on the radio on K-Rock in like a feature. And I was like, oh, that's good, but it feels like a gimmick song. I wasn't really thinking about it. And there were a lot of gimmick songs around then, like United States of Whatever. Then someone was like, Troy, you like all of this stuff. This is like the best version of this stuff. I'm like, no, that's the If You See Jordan one. And I like that song now, but... And then I just immediately liked it, right? When I got all those songs delivered to me. And I really didn't start listening to Andrew until both North and Leaving Through the Window was out. So I got it all at once. Mm-hmm. And I don't sort of have like the way that lots of Andrew fans have where they see those albums as different, because for me, they were all just on mixtapes together. For me, the interesting thing about this song is that I'm from Southern California and I'm from San Clemente, Dana Point area. I actually had some of the same teachers that Andrew McMahon had, and whenever I hear songs like this, all I can think about is literally he was driving by Cavanaugh Park and places like this, and so was I, and it's just so much of that.
Oh wow.
For me.
That is so you have that, not only that emotional connection to the music, but literally a geographic connection as well. You can see the places he's talking about, which unlike a lot of us, we can think about them, we can envision them with his very visual lyrics, but we don't actually drive by them or live there.
And when he posts on Instagram, I'm like, oh, that's where I used to hang out all the time.
Yeah.
And parks in Southern California, for me and teenagers in general, like they're so important, right? So when you're younger, it's where your parents take you and you learn lessons. And like California it's like an urban sprawl such that there is the beach and then there are parks. And really those are the only outside spaces. And even really wealthy people often don't have that big of yards or big of houses. So like parks are really, really, really important to so many people. So it's where you go when you're a kid. It's where you play soccer when you're in grade school. In my late teens, I did a lot of acrobatics and gymnastics. So we would go to the parks. That's where I learned how to do backflips and 360 backflips and stuff like that. And then in college or also when I was more in high school, they became this space where at night we would sit on these jungle gyms and have like existential conversations in the moonlight that probably weren't that deep, but we thought they were at that time, about growing up and thinking about how men can do terrible things and stuff like that.
I could definitely relate to everything you're saying there. Absolutely. Yeah. Our space was my buddy's living room, or front room, if you will. So there was these couches, and he would turn on, music, because we loved listening to music just like I do now. And he would turn on music, but kind of low, and we would just talk. We would have those conversations that you're talking about, thinking we knew it all, like thinking about the world and our lives and that sort of, what we're gonna be, what we're gonna do, when we get older and all that. So it was fond memories. And fortunately, he video recorded some of those conversations, and those still live somewhere.
Wow.
Not on YouTube, fortunately, but somewhere.
I have a lot of my teenage poetry that I wrote when I was trying to be like Andrew and Bright Eyes and stuff. And I look back, I'm like, oh, that one line is good. Oh, Troy, your meter is so bad. Why did you think why did you think that was good?
Yeah, I never made any attempts at poetry. I think it was a confidence thing. I just didn't have the confidence to try to write my thoughts down. So did you have a chance to check out and compare the Ready Break version versus the Leaving Through the Window version?
The Leaving Through the Window version is very, very much better.
Yeah, it's very, very produced, right? Like it sounds like a professional album, which is, I know what they were going for. And I didn't realize how different they were. So when I got these songs back in 2002, after I saw them at Warped Tour, went home and downloaded a bunch of these songs off of whatever service that you could, get MP3s off at the time for free. And I don't know which version of Cavanaugh Park I actually had. It's very possible I had the Ready Break version for many, many years. I guess I could, I still have the burned CD from back then. If it still works, I guess I could listen.
That's awesome.
It may have been the Leaving Through the Window version. It may not have been. I don't even know. I don't see them interchangeably. I think they're very different. What I get off of the old version is like the hollow drums. Andrew's voice definitely sounds better in the newer version. The piano notes hit a little bit differently in the newer version. Yep. Let's face it, a lot of time had passed in their career, right? They had been picked up by a major label studio at that point, and they had more experience. They were out of high school. But most importantly, they were working with a major record label in a major studio. So much higher quality production on the Leaving Through the Window version.
And I think the Leaving Through the Window version sounds like it could fit in on later Andrew albums. Like it has like this, it has the very, for me, Andrew has this very like sweeping, what he calls his new album, an adventurous sound. But like, I feel like all of his albums to some degree have that adventurous sound. And I think some of the sort of older recordings don't have that sort of sonic quality that I think really is important to me as a listener. And of course, everybody likes different things, but I'd rather have the amazing sonic quality of some stadium style vibe to it, or just like a Canyons version of an acoustic style.
Love those Canyons versions. Absolutely love them. I heard Josh Partington say in an interview a long time ago that Leaving Through the Window was really just a greatest hits collection of what they had accumulated during that time, either songwriting or recording wise. And they just basically picked the best songs out of the 30 that they had. And they were like, okay, we're going to record, whether we've recorded them or not, and a lot they had, we're going to record them again for this album. That album, like you said, it is very diverse. It's like, it runs the gamut. You know, a lot of people put the pop punk label on Something Corporate, which fits some of their songs on that album. But things like Cavanaugh Park, if that's all you heard by Something Corporate, you would not have called them pop punk.
And if all you had heard was If You See Jordan, you probably didn't think they could write a song like Cavanaugh Park.
Oh, I agree with that 100%. Yeah, so the Ready Break version of this song was produced by a Craig Black, from what I found, which I couldn't find any information about this guy. I'm assuming it's just someone they knew in high school or someone who was into music that they hooked up with to record them. Maybe somebody who worked at the Ventura, where I think they recorded that album. I couldn't find anything else on the guy. But the version on Leaving Through the Window is produced by Jim Wirt, as well as the rest of that album was. And the performers on the Ready Break version included the original lineup of Something Corporate: Josh Partington, Ruben Hernandez on guitars, Kevin Page on bass, Brian Ireland on drums. Then Ruben left the band sometime in 2001, so William Tell was on the Leaving Through the Window version as their replacement guitarist. We've kind of talked about the difference between these two. You ready to talk about live shows?
Let's go for live shows. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say, I think one of the interesting things from your other episodes is how just in general live shows have changed my interpretations of songs. I think you were talking about Fire Escape. When Fire Escape came out, I was like, this is good. And then like the way that it just became this anthem on stage, I was like, oh my God. And now I hear it differently. And I think even like the ability of those songs to be played live has brought in like new meaning to a lot of them. I think it's the case that like Dark Blue wasn't the anthem that it is for Jack's Mannequin at the start. Like Mixtape and Bruised were like equally out there, but then Dark Blue became this thing, I think because in part of just how dynamic and mature it sounds live, or maybe I'm reading into it. But yeah, I think that it's such a fascinating thing, a theme that comes across your episodes.
You know, Dark Blue was never my favorite song on Everything in Transit, but it seems very powerful and very important when he plays that in concert. And I think a lot of it has to do with his energy and the energy of the crowd that comes in response to the way he's playing it, or the fact that he's playing it, I guess.
Yeah, and I also think that Andrew has aged, and the songs that seem more mature from his past are often now the ones that seem, or at least live, he gives the most into it. Or when I'm listening, right, Cavanaugh Park seems more mature than If You See Jordan or I Want to Save You. And I think Dark Blue seems more mature than I'm Ready or most everything off Everything in Transit, still like one of my favorite albums ever. And I think that is also probably another reason that we've aged with him.
That's a good point about Cavanaugh Park. It's a deeper poetic song compared to a lot of what was on Leaving Through the Window. And so it's not only still relatable, but it feels like, even though it was written by a 16-year-old, it feels like mature writing for a 16-year-old. And it makes sense for a 40-some-year-old to still be singing that song and being proud of that song.
Yeah, and you sent me that video where he talked about how Cavanaugh Park is a growing up song and he feels like he's always growing up, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I feel like that is one of the things that also makes this song, at least for me, and I think for him, seem relevant, right? If this idea is that we're always growing up, we're always maturing and we're changing, and to some degree we always don't feel like there's a place to belong, it's great. And I think when you're younger, or when I was younger, every single emo song I liked was the ones about, girls, right? And then as you're older, you go back and you listen to these songs and you're like, I don't relate to any of these things anymore, especially the heartbreak ones. At least that's me. And so some of those other songs that are about more immortal themes or just themes that aren't about high school love are the ones that, at least for me, keep it going.
Live on. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to teach about to college students is the idea of a brand or anything over time. And so one thing I do is I teach about how Andrew has had these really distinct eras. And so he has his teenage rock star era in Something Corporate, his Lost 20-something with Jack's Mannequin, and then his an adult era, right, with The Wilderness. My students are like, oh, Troy, you like music. I'm going to share a song with you that I really like right now as a 19-year-old, and you're going to like it. And they sing me a song that's like Circles by Post Malone, or just some song, or like just some song like Deja Vu by Olivia Rodrigo. And I'm like, I get it. When I was your age, I liked songs like that. I liked songs like, you could be my punk rock princess. I'm 21 and invincible, right?
Yeah.
But if I still liked that stuff genuinely as a 35-year-old man, something failed, right? And telling students that and seeing them understand that and seeing why a song like Careless by Andrew is useful to me. I'll share that one. It's like a song about make sure I am not too tired to see my dreams are coming true. And this idea that music serves different needs based upon the sort of contextual and emotional moment of the individual is just this wonderful, interesting lesson to show them. And also, I do it constantly because no one really talked to me about how you changed when I was younger. And even in like my psychology classes, they didn't make the point when I think they could have made it more. And how you are going to grow up and you're going to want different things. And that's not going to be a bad thing. It's often going to be a symbol of a good thing. And there will be a day when actually, won't it be awesome that a breakup song isn't your favorite song? And they're like, oh, yeah. The contradictory point of this, of course, is going to be that the song that still resonates me has the line, there's never any place for me to be totally happy. But we'll get to that in a moment.
Okay. This is great. Yeah, no, I just wanted to go through some of the stats of when this song's been played live. So I find it interesting that it's been played only 47 times, according to Setlist FM anyway, only 47 times by Something Corporate. And then they did play them on most of those dates in 2010 during the reunion tour. Now, you shared your concert history with me recently, which thanks. I love a good concert history. I track my own, the progression and all the shows I've been to. And even back like 20 years ago, there's shows I don't remember attending at all, but I'm glad I have them documented somehow.
Yeah.
As a fellow fan that documents your history and a fellow Andrew fan, it looks like you started seeing Andrew live during the Jax era. Is that right?
That is correct. I never saw Something Corporate till Something, so I never saw Something Corporate, but then I saw the first Something Corporate reunion where they surprised reunited at Bamboozle after the Jack set and just played Constantine, Hurricane, and I Woke Up in a Car. And then I also saw Something Corporate when they reunited more fully.
Okay, excellent. I didn't realize that happened with Bamboozle. I guess I was completely out of the loop. So they played as Jack's Mannequin, and then they...
just played 3 Something Corporate songs. It was a show in Southern California, so it was really easy for them to do. And yeah, it was a pretty magical moment at Bamboozle left. And it was this actually wonderful day where they had canceled. So Dashboard Confessional was the headliner. And they had canceled, I believe, somebody in between. I think it might have been Plus 44 or something. And so there was a rumor that just got started around that Something Corporate was going to be the mystery guest. And so for the whole day, there was this palpable things on the fields where the outdoor concert was. There's like, are we about to see Something Corporate? Are we about to see Something Corporate? And then we did. And then right after Something Corporate played on the side stage, Cute Is What We Aim For went on, and they said, I want you to remember this night forever, not for us, but because we just got to watch one of my favorite bands. And it was utterly amazing. And I think that for lots of us, and probably lots of people listening, right, SoCo is only around for so long, and a lot of us didn't get to see him. We were supposed to see him on a Warped Tour, and I think he then didn't go. Soko was going to go on a Warped Tour, and then I think Andrew got sick, so we didn't. That was the time. And so that moment, right, it was just amazing. Like, just like literally, this is the thing that I want to see most in the world at that time in my life.
Yep.
And I'm the only one who's got to see it, or the 1,000 of us here, or a couple thousand of us there. It was great.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, that sounds amazing. It's how often does that happen? The thing that you're hoping and wishing for and waiting for, and then that actually comes true right in front of your eyes. So that's the magic of live music, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, Andrew's continued to play this song, of course, and we've talked about a little bit about why already, much more in Andrew McMahon in the Wilderness era. So actually now it's a total of 161 times that he's played it. Mm-hmm. He plays it quite a bit. I think he played it at every Three Pianos tour show, and I think you saw that show, right?
I did, yes.
And so it made sense because that was a tour to basically reflect back on his life via his book, Three Pianos. But we did recently discover together that Cavanaugh Park wasn't specifically mentioned in Three Pianos, and I guess I just assumed it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he talks about that era of his life a lot, you know, being in high school, being with his friends, some of the people, some of the same characters in the story, if you will. But he doesn't actually reference the lyrics of that song like I thought he did. So the only reason I knew, I got to be honest, is I have the ebook version in addition to the paper version. And I actually searched for certain keywords, including the title and the name and the, you know, Adam, and just different keywords from the lyrics that maybe wouldn't pop out anywhere else. And it's not mentioned anywhere in the book. I was really shocked by that. So,
sidebar, just as a person who lives where Andrew lives, right, in the Dana Point, San Clemente area, reading that book was just insane.
I bet.
Because it was just like him talking about going to all these places that I would eat and stuff, and like, I was like, oh my gosh, it's even more. Like, in the songs, obviously, you get things like, let's get drunk and drive us to the harbor. He's driving down to Dana Point. We used to play that song all the time when we'd go over to Dana Point at night. And yeah, it was a lovely, lovely feeling. And I love talking about, like, all this. And whenever you talk to people about why they love what they love, it's so intertwined in things that are beyond, like, the thing itself. Whether that is, right, the reason you love things at Disney is often because of who you went to. So one of the times I used to use this as an example because when I was teaching about Disney, is like, what are people's favorite Disney memories? Well, here's one of my favorite Disney memories. I was standing in line for Splash Mountain for over an hour, and we made my friend recite the entire plot of Lost because none of anybody in the group had seen it. And it was one of my favorite Disney memories. And like, all these things around the centerpiece itself are so important. And I think that is also what I find so, you know, interesting also about what you do, right? You are creating the culture such that there is something beyond the music released on those albums that now people will enjoy because you tell stories about, you know, like, people getting emotional about talking about, I think his name was Andrew, was on recently talking about how emotional he gets with his wife about talking when the songs come on. And now that is part of how I will experience Andrew even more as well.
Oh, that's so awesome to hear. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. You know, that's the best thing by far about this podcast is I've experienced the music all this time. But then when I talk to guests like yourself, like Andrew Ware, who was on back in December, I get to experience the music in a different way. And yeah, it kind of builds the legacy of that music, so to speak. And that goes for even when people just chat me on Instagram. People will chat me about something I said in the episode. And that kind of helps build it up for me too. Like, not just hey, someone's out there listening, but just, you know, the experience of I'm experiencing this with somebody now. I said something about the music that someone reacted to, and they're reacting back to me about that music. Yeah. So that video I sent you, if it's the one I think it is, was it the one that I sent you that I took on the rock boat a couple years ago? It was just Andrew on a piano and John Foreman from Switchfoot is sitting next to him?
Yep.
Okay. That was an incredible experience in itself because they did like this storytellers type of a set. John would play a song and then he would talk about it. And then Andrew would play a song and he would talk about his song. So they were telling stories back and forth. It was one of the coolest sets I think I've ever seen in my life. You know, I used to watch a little bit of VH1 storytellers back in the 90s when that was a thing, where the artist would acoustically perform some of their songs and they'd talk about each one in between. And I remember thinking, oh, I wish like the artists that I liked would do a storyteller. It was usually like the adult contemporary artists of the day, which I was more into the modern, rock stuff. So it's really cool that I got to finally experience that with one of my favorite artists of all time.
I can't imagine that in the next 5 to 6 years, somebody won't revive that with lots of artists for some streaming service, right? They need so many pieces of content. Things like Bruce Springsteen has, I think, proved that when he released his thing, that those things can be successful. BTS, Taylor Swift concerts. Somebody will probably make that happen, but probably it will just be like Post Malone, and we won't get our favorite artists. Or maybe somebody will there'll be like an A24 version of it where it's like the less popular people.
Yeah, like the not so mainstream for the modern era. That would be nice. Yeah, so I actually got to see Cavanaugh Park performed twice in the same day on that day, by the way, which was pretty neat because Andrew and John played in the, and it was in the same venue, by the way. Andrew and John played in the Stardust that afternoon, and then that night, Mikey, Morgan, and Andrew all played a set, the 3-piano set that you saw, very similar to what you saw on stage. They played that along with Cavanaugh Park. So it was a very unique day as an Andrew fan, let's say.
Awesome.
But yeah, the only other times I remember for sure seeing that song performed live was on Instagram Live back in 2020. He played a lot of songs on Instagram Live, and this was one of them. It's no surprise that he would play a song like this, a reflective, moody piece. And then I saw him play it on Camp Wilderness. I don't know how familiar you are with Camp Wilderness, but last June, Andrew did a live stream for all the Camp Wilderness people. And it was celebrating 20 years of Leaving Through the Window. So it was about a month after the day. That would have been 20 years, let's say. All right. And he played 6 or 7 songs on his piano in his garage studio. It was really a storyteller's type of show because he talked about every song in between. I wish he would have played the whole album, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. I got 6 or 7 Leaving Through the Window songs on a piano by a guy who wrote this stuff, 25 years prior. So it was pretty darn neat. If anybody listening is on Camp Wilderness and doesn't know that exists, or if you're thinking about signing up for Camp Wilderness and you end up doing so, be sure to go to the video section and find it's called the CW June live stream, and it's that Leaving Through the Window live stream. Highly recommend it. And Cavanaugh Park, I did write it down. It's at about the 50-minute mark if you wanted to go straight to it, but I would just listen to the whole thing. I've watched it several times.
As a person who's in Camp Wilderness, I imagine that some people listening to this are not. What have you discovered about Andrew or the fandom that maybe we don't know? Like, for instance, when I went to the first fan event that I'd ever been with Andrew, I was like, oh, wow, he is incredibly responsive to people. Like, he's just feeds off other people's energy, and I didn't realize that clearly. Is there anything else that you've learned about anything?
Nothing real specific, but I'll kind of tell you about, in general, about some experiences I've had and why that's been important to me as a fan. It's very personal, as you'd expect. It's like a Patreon. It's probably another version of the same type of deal. It's very personal. So he will announce things ahead of time before he announces them publicly on Instagram and Facebook, like tour dates and upcoming, when he was releasing his vinyl, there's a special sale on Camp Wilderness. So there's things like that, little advantages you get, but really it's more of that personal connection. So he'll do live streams. I'd say they're about once a month. They're not always every month, but about once a month. And he talks to us during them, plays music, but then he'll just take questions and he'll respond to the chat, just like you've seen if you ever saw any of those Instagram lives. But he also will, we've done Zooms where he'll just unmute. He'll say, hey, ask you to unmute. And he's like, hey, what do you got for, I see you're wearing hey, I see your kid is in the background, or tell me about your dog, or like, I saw you kind of like mouthing the lyrics to that song, and he'll kind of encourage you to talk. And other times he'll just say, hey, does anybody have questions? And so I've been able to ask any questions that I've wanted to, really. And I try to make it related to what he's doing or talking about or promoting at the time. then he'll respond and I'll say, I'll see you in Grand Rapids. He's like, oh, looking forward to it, and it just feels so personal, whereas I never would get that on the other social medias. So Camp Wilderness really is a social media for the fans who want to get that closer connection to Andrew. You get a little bit of extra content, but you get that more personal connection, which is what the value is for me.
Yeah, and I think Andrew really enjoys that, right? He likes to deliver value to people. Mm-hmm. And as much as he probably still enjoys playing the songs, he probably enjoys delivering value in different ways. And I'm about to compare myself to Andrew. I'm not Andrew, but I have big publications that have been successful and out there. And I'm sort of not sick, but I don't enjoy just getting on a stage and saying the same things that I've said a million times. I enjoy finding a new way to say that, right? So I'll tell a story that's related to that specific city we're in around whatever, and just like Andrew will be I'm gonna play the song differently, or I'm just interested in talking to people and how they're reacting to the things and not hearing my same. And when I was 14, I denied science because, and I'm I've heard the punchline enough. Yeah, it is actually really interesting to hear, in a lot of interviews also with a lot of these artists, now, a lot of them really do want to make new music and do things, but a lot of them are just like Motion City Soundtrack said, we just want to show up and make people happy. We just want to deliver joy. And I think Andrew wants to deliver joy in lots of different ways, though I think he is still restless about creating cool new stuff.
I think he is too. Yeah, I think he's got both things going. But yeah. I liked what you said about Motion City Soundtrack. They just want to show up and deliver joy. That's a neat concept. And I think that the same can be said about a lot of artists. But yeah, just to kind of put that out there so honestly and bluntly, I appreciate that. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know if I really answered your question. You said, have I learned anything about Andrew specifically? I feel like I've gotten more insight into his life. So he will talk about his family. He will talk about where he lives. He'll walk around his house. His family members are in the background sometimes. Sometimes he'll post pictures or short videos, places that they are. Hey, my family's on vacation right now, that he won't necessarily post on Instagram. Very few times I've seen this, but sometimes he'll post very candid little short videos of him just talking and ranting about something. So he was just talking about creating content for social media. It was very candid, very honest about kind of, how difficult it can be sometimes to create that content and get that out there for people new fans to respond to the content. So,
as a person who is does a lot in that social media and stuff, we talked about Andrew's responsive, right? Mm-hmm. So Andrew is, if you were to decide what is Andrew really good at, he's so responsive. I remember one time on a show, he walked over to the side of the stage and he was kind of looking around, are people enjoying this? And I just held my cup up and he gave me a nod. He's okay, this is working, right? And if you think about what social media is it's nothing like that, right? It's you in the darkness. And so I think that is probably something that he's probably less attracted to. And probably just also, the skill set. He's literally a genius at every other thing that he does. And here comes social media, right, and whatnot.
Typically, your musicians aren't necessarily the people who can create comical content that'll keep people coming back. I don't know. I haven't seen it often. Sometimes it happens. There are a few musicians out there that do a good job, but.
So if we really think about it from a modern marketing perspective, the artists that are coming up today have to be.
Yeah.
So that the market literally demands, so we get Post Malone, Doja Cat people. And I'm not saying they don't make good music. I'm just saying the reason in part they are famous is because of their abilities beyond music and beyond performing on stage.
Yep. 100% agree with you. Recently, you sent me a picture of you at Cavanaugh Park.
Yes.
Tell me about that. So that was a surprise. Yeah. I appreciate that. So for the listeners, we were emailing back and forth for a while, scheduling time, and you just shot me an email and said, "Hey, I'm at Cavanaugh Park. Check it out." And like you had a sign in the background. That was so cool. I was like, "Oh, it's the place." And kind of like what we were talking about earlier, living in Ohio and Michigan and Maryland and those places, and nowhere near California, I don't experience those places firsthand. So it's like seeing a movie set to me when you send me that picture. So.
Cavanaugh Park, to spoil it for everyone, is not very nice. It is literally on the side of a freeway. There's like a 20-foot wall. It's a kind of a narrow strip of green grass, maybe a little place to play soccer. Pretty much, it's pretty much just a neighborhood park where people would go there if they just wanted to get out of their house for the moment. And by neighborhood, I mean like nobody's walking more than probably 2 blocks to it. Like it's not the amazing parks for people. Well, you're not going to know them anyways, but it's not San Rigonio. It's not cute Verde Park. These places, it's not Sunset Park of these places in the other parts of OC. But yeah, it is definitely a place that you could be alone. If you wanted to be alone, you could go out there pretty much at any time during the day and find some solitude, even if that solitude involves the drone of the 5 freeway, sometimes just 20 feet from you.
Yeah, I think it was in the live stream that he said he viewed it as a place where he could go and just think and get his head straight. And he even did say it's not really a park. But it wasn't. but he also said it's not far from where he lives now. So I was glad to hear that you were not only familiar with the place, but you knew where it was and you actually went there. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
So we kind of alluded to this earlier in talking about our own, growing up experiences. Andrew said this was a super existential jam for him, is the way he put it in his live stream. So he's really proud that these words found him at a young age. Again, I'm surprised that he didn't reference the lyrics in the book. It just seems like it would have been a fitting place.
Mm-hmm.
But about this song here, he referenced it that, the lyrics were more about how he was moving around and trying to find a place to fit in. And he was, the new kid in school again. And he felt a little alien to the culture and to the world around him. And so in our emails, when we were talking about what song to do, you mentioned this idea of fitting in and how that's maybe one thing you relate to in this song. Do you mind talking about that?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people will relate to it with their own flavor, so I'm not like unique in this. But yeah, I genuinely still to some degree relate to that core line. There was never anywhere for someone like me to be totally happy, right? And sort of the way that I often describe this is I have a lot of different parts of myself, right? Scientific mind, artistic heart. I'm very enthusiastic, very, very earnest about getting things right. And I'm really okay about going to really, really dark places. And I think it's really, really important to go to those dark places. And I think a lot of people that are trying to make education and things better don't just like think of really dark things that are true about the world. And I will be in conversations with people all the time and I'll be vibing really well. And then all of a sudden I will say something really serious, or I will say something like, if you consider it from a postmodern angle, and all of a sudden it'll just shut down the conversation. And that silence that falls is just soul sucking. And like that consistent experience that I have, and I know tons of other people have is just this thing. And all these places that I've existed, bouncing between, the artistic and the scientific and the business, I sort of never really feel at home in the way that, everybody else is sharing the same lingo and the cadence, and they have the same spectrum that they want to be on the conversation. And I'm constantly in my head being like, don't share that part of yourself, Troy. Don't share that part of yourself, Troy. They won't like that. And they won't. Like, it's this is not a Disney movie. If you show that, they won't like it. And so, yeah, I'm a well-adjusted and happy person. But yeah, I still feel very much outside of most groups.
I appreciate you sharing that with us. And so would you say that it's that dichotomy between the science world and the art world, and kind of feeling caught between because you're part art, you're part science, and that doesn't always fit for everybody?
Yeah, I think that's very much true. There's also just the really like serious stuff. You might have to put a trigger warning on this. So I work in education all the time and I want it to be better. And then I'll say things like, well, these kids don't even know how to write a topic sentence. And everyone else is like, let's do a fun, extensive empathy thing. I'm like, these kids come into college without logic. and we are not helping them, and we are hurting them, and we are not teaching them the skills that actually are fundamental. No, we'll teach them some empathy thing. No, they are legitimately depressed. Or like I'll be at like a graduation ceremony, and this, the president of the university will get out there, and this is the trigger warning, and they'll say out to people like, hey, look, every one of our students here is so great. You're all so wonderful. And I'm like, we are at a college. There are thousands of students in that audience. It is almost certain that someone in that audience has sexually assaulted, racially abused, or at a lesser extent bullied another person. And that person is sitting in the same field with that abuser. And we never talk about that, and we never deal with it.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And people just shut down. They don't want to deal with that. And they don't want to deal with a person who is going to bring up those truths while flying a flag that they are the most inclusive, wonderful, thoughtful, empathy people. Yeah. And so some of the times some of the time it's like the Fall Out Boy thing. I want to be invited, but I would never show up. Yeah, I think that is it. And, just like the idea of also other divides, like the high-low thing, like I think that there is intelligence in Andrew McMahon lyrics, in Fall Out Boy lyrics, and I will interchangeably be in a discussion talking with people about like Sylvia Plath, and I'll be talking about like one of my favorite poems, Mystic or Tulips, and the air is a mill of hooks, and then I'll be like, have you ever felt alone in a crowded room? And they're like, what's that? It's like, Jack's Mannequin. Wait, is that the guy that's saying If You See Jordan? Like they wouldn't know that, but they'd be like, that's crappy pop punk. And they're like, no, you don't get to be a part of it. You either reference Caroline Polachek or some high-level Pitchfork-approved artists, or Sylvia Plath or Amanda Gorman. You do not reference Olivia Rodrigo or Fall Out Boy, right? And they just you're out of the system. You're just cut, and it's just really weird because like some of the time, like when I'm with them, right, with those types of people, so much of me overlaps with them, and I really like them, and I really like that part of myself. And then all of a sudden, it's like, don't share that part of you, Troy, because they will just look at you and be like, no.
So it's when you want to state the honest truth, like you were saying earlier, and some people don't want to talk about that honest truth and go to dark places when it's uncomfortable.
Or I like to be really silly and fun, and that also, right? So the oscillations, or you're listening to me, audience. You can sort of hear this just like smirk in my smile and this sort of excitement level that I have, right? My happy place is jumping up and down at a rock show. And I think that one of the reasons that I'm often so attracted to music and Disney, and actually the classroom sometimes, is those are sort of the places where I sometimes feel like I am totally happy, right? I mean, to work for a company like Disney, where the goal is literally, let's create a space that is the happiest place on earth, and there's, tons of issues and blah, 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 but there is something interesting about that endeavor, in part because you're thinking, why don't people feel happy? Because they don't feel valued. Okay, because they feel unsafe, because there's not enough stimulation, because they have no friends. Okay, Disney, stimulation, safe, everybody treats you like you're cool, with certain exceptions and certain groups, and you're there with your good friends. And if you're there on a crowded day, you're there on an uncrowded day, it's just heaven if you buy into the escapism. So that's a long set of things, but it's just the oscillation, and the being so much in so many different ways is very hard for other people to get a handle on or want to be around.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about that for someone like me to be totally happy. So looking for that place, because he was saying, and there was never any place, but you just talked about some of the places that you can be totally happy, a few of the maybe many even. What do you think about going into the past to find that joy and happiness? Is there value in looking back at the past? That I mentioned the word nostalgia earlier. I talked about thinking about my friends in that living room and having that conversation. What is your perspective on looking to the past, looking to the nostalgia to find that place?
This is personally for me, And nostalgia obviously psychologically has lots and lots of benefits. One of the reasons nostalgia is so useful is exactly what you said, is usually it's associated with other people. So nostalgia really isn't always sometimes an over romanticization of thing. It's just feeling social connection.
Yeah.
Right. And so when nostalgia is that, it's cool. But my general response is I don't like nostalgia. And my sort of simple take on this is I remember in high school, and I was with my DJ friends, and we were at a party. We were at another person's party, and they played Backstreet Boys as like this ironic nostalgia thing, because by then it was already nostalgic.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but people have already done this trick already. And then I looked at my friend, and I'm like saying, are we going to spend our entire life dropping this Backstreet Boys and reacting like it's a nostalgic creative throwback for decades? And the answer is apparently yes for most people.
Yes.
And for me, it's just not that as much. And I personally, most of my favorite music, if I'm a person who always feels like I'm always growing up, I'm always sort of I'm finding the new music of growing up. And so most all the music I listen to has been released after 2010, right? A song like Cavanaugh Park, we'll get on it. I'll occasionally go listen to like Leaving Through the Window Straight Through. And so I'm not like fully against nostalgia, and I loved Hello Gone Days, but I really like Andrew's songs now, right? So like Keep Me in the Bright Now, Don't Be Too Tired to See Your Dreams Are Coming True, or, Dead Man's Dollar, I Want to Make a Life, but I want to live with you and for you, but I want to live there too. Like those are the songs that I really, really, really feel. And since I'm a emotional person, I want those things that represent those emotions that I have now.
Okay, that's fair. By the way, and I didn't mention this earlier, I love what you did with those designs. So for those of you listening, you may or may not have caught this on Instagram. Troy made these designs featuring quotes from my interview with Andrew back in January, and then shared them with me on Instagram. I just want to thank you for that. Now that I'm meeting you in person, I was able to message you back and say, hey, thanks. And that's one of the ways we got connected. But I just really genuinely appreciated that, and I wanted you to know that. So it was really neat to see those words that he said in a conversation I had with him come to life in color, in pictures, and I'll share those back out on Instagram so everybody listening can see what I'm talking about, but if you didn't catch that.
Yeah, I loved it. And I mean, I love using quotes from artists about the artistic process or psychology in classes. So I was doing that in part to share, but I was also doing that as a practice that I do, which is I like to, when I hear something amazing, grab it, make it presentable and shareable, and now I have this thing forever. And one of my things that I often say is I have a scientific mind and an artistic heart, and I use that to create and capture ideas in many different ways. And so one of the ways of capturing ideas is just taking a quote and then putting it with an aesthetic, right? Or taking a quote and then writing 5 examples of other songs that do it, right? So like he had that really great quote that I'd actually never heard somebody say so clearly, which is the bridge of the song is where you sort of want to be like, what is the song really about? So you write the whole song, and then the bridge clarifies and is this extra punch, right? And then I wrote down examples, like what other songs do that? Oh, Cavanaugh Park does that. How could that be used in a stage when I'm talking about something? Oh, I should tell the entire performance. I should give my entire talk like I normally do, and then have one anecdote at the end that just reinforces the message, which is like generally what I often do is just have a summary and stuff. But I'm like, oh, additionally, I could just have this one capper story that brings in all the themes. And if it's a little repetitive, that's fine, because we all know that that's how we can be towards the end of a song or end of a presentation. So really, really love that.
Yeah, and it reinforces learning to hear it again in a different way, right? So yeah.
Yes.
I'm gonna throw another line at you from the song. Some things never do change.
Yeah.
I think that's, again, I'll throw that word dichotomy out there. There's a dichotomy there, because to say some things never do change, you could say in a sense, yeah, that's true. But then in another sense, we know things always change. Everything changes. Everything has changed in our lives, in the world, in the culture. Everything will always change. Yet somehow some things never do change. And I agree with that line. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I exist in a world where some days my job is to explain to people how things are the same all the time, and some things are different. So different, I'm like, okay, the postmodernism of the 90s is fading out, and we're in this new, more remix or meta modern culture. Post 2020, we have different feelings about work and mental health and stuff. But at the same time, remember that in general, human beings are pretty much the same. Right? Human beings are pretty much the same. They exist on the earth for a long time, where the narratives and schemas they form do not quickly change. And usually anytime people like change a schema, it's not really fully changing it. It's just like altering. Oh, I used to think that when things are different, that's bad. That's my general schema. But now I won't have that opinion towards gay people. But I'm not updating my schema in general that different things are bad. I'm just correcting this one little thing. And so that is a lot of what I do, which is, people have some core fundamental motives. They always have those core fundamental motives. As much as you can change the conceptualization of gender, those ideas of gender are pretty strongly just unconsciously being hit from every single thing you see around you. And so it's some things never do change is so true.
I love that. I love that interpretation of it. Are there any specific lyrics in the song that jump out at you that you want to talk about?
Quite a few.
Oh, great. Have at it.
Let's go with a dark one and then go with a misheard one, because I love that theme on yours. So, I mean, the line, "men can do terrible things," is just an amazing, amazing line. And whenever I hear that line, I always think of September 11th. And I remember thinking that this terrible, terrible thing has happened, but the people who committed the terrible, terrible thing didn't think it was wrong. And that idea that like one day you'll be a man and you can grow up, and you can grow up into a person that could do potentially terrible things, and you might not even know it, right? And then I think the way that, we reacted to 9/11, we did some terrible things. And so I think about that a lot. And again, I think I love this song because right, I love Andrew, and I often think that the best songs, and oftentimes the most successful songs, are the songs that have like this massive scope. And this song has a massive narrative scope, right? It's about things never changing. It's about never being somewhere. It's about dreams. It's about growing up. It literally has characters like he's at least a decade younger in the character he's referring to at that. So like just that. A couple other random things. I love Andrew's consistent judicious use of the F word, which is he keeps it powerful because he only uses it so often.
Yep.
I really like how he, at Cavanaugh Park, to sit alone in the dark, and then when he says, "and dream," and the way that he says dream in this really intense way, I really like. And then, given that I've listened to your podcast so much, here's another one. Misheard lyrics. I always thought that the line, "that ain't a shock," was "that anger shock."
That anger shock. Okay.
Anger shock. And for angsty me, anger shock just made sense, right? He's angry, and there's some anger shock, and he's just creating a phrase that like emotively fits there.
That's a new one to me.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that one.
And so when I sing it, I still sing anger shock because the angsty me and the angsty still me really, really likes that idea of it.
If you heard my Rescued episode, then you know that there's some lyrics I'm always going to sing wrong because I'm like, that's what it always meant to me. That's how I connected to it. So,
and I really do like this idea of like I don't know what Andrew's like state on it, but lots and lots of popular bands, and I love bringing up this band because it annoys all of my literature friends, Linkin Park, right? I recently had a trivia question of what two bands with my lit friends, what two artists of the 21st century have the most album sales, and only two of them have two in the top 10, and they're like, Adele, and they couldn't get it, and then like a minute into it, they're like, oh my god, Troy's trolling us. The answer is Linkin Park, isn't it? And I'm like, yes, it is.
Do you try to work Linkin Park into conversations frequently, or?
My joke is with my literature friends who I do trivia and other things with is I try to troll them to get Linkin Park to be the answer to certain things that they don't see coming.
Okay.
And again, I've actually sidebar, like I think that I love liking Linkin Park because I think it is one of like the most, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's one of the most like punk rock things to do amongst like academic elitists, right? Just like, they like literally are quoting like Amanda Gorman and Lord Byron, and I'm like, somewhere I belong. But what Linkin Park did, of course, in their lyrics, which is why I got here, is that they purposefully tried to make them ambiguous so people could read in their own stories. So, for instance, they hardly ever use gendered pronouns, and it's really just Linkin Park capturing a feeling. And whenever I sort of like, if you like explain why Linkin Park as a band is so successful, is that they are able to have both specificity in language, but without specificity that alienates anybody from relating to the song. So the song could be anger at a friend, anger at a significant other, anger at a parent in a lot of their songs. And that makes the song so useful. And like, as a person who really cares about serving his audience and making things useful for them, I really appreciate that fact about sort of what Linkin Park does. And now we just turned Andrew's show into Linkin Park.
Linkin Park discussion.
We can cut this.
Totally cool. So I wanted to go back to something that you talked about earlier, that men can do terrible things line. It was only after reading his book, Three Pianos, that I read that a different way. You know, I did see it as more general before, whereas we're going to grow up with this naivety about the world, and then we're slowly going to realize, wow, human beings can be awful. They can do terrible things. Men can do terrible things. But we're reading the poetry of a 16-year-old, which is, I always have to go back. I have to remind myself, honestly, not to negate anything that we're saying or talking about here. It's really great poetry, let's face it. Yeah. Because like you said, there's all these themes here. Had I tried my hand at poetry at 16, it wouldn't have been anything like this, I can guarantee you that. But I do see that line as maybe reflective of, you know, because he's saying, son, one day you'll be a man and men can do terrible things. I'm seeing it almost reflective of like his experience with his father and how his father did terrible things to the family. Yep. And it eventually divided them for a time. But again, we can generalize that line to much bigger things, and I do believe that's what he was doing at that line as well. So in his personal life, as well as generalizing it to, like you were saying with the Linkin Park line, they write lyrics in such a way where I could put my own interpretation on that. So I can interpret it my own way. Yeah, I mean, I really like the idea that you're pointing out. Like, this is the poetry of a teenager, which is interesting to think about in lots of ways. But I really also like the fact that it's always a reminder to me as a teacher to be like, oh, an 18-year-old could be Andrew McMahon or it could be John Keats, right? And these teenagers can do amazing, amazing things. And you get to be in the teaching environment around some of those. And as me, I've also been gifted of teaching really mostly at Duke University and the awesome business school at the University of Oregon. So I've got some wonderful, bright young millennials and Gen Zs who I've taught. I can't agree with you more. I was a teacher for several years in secondary education, and then I was a school counselor for 9 years. And it upsets me a little bit when and sometimes I have to, I wouldn't say get in an argument, but just disagree when I hear people generalize to say all kids are this, all kids are that, and it's something negative, because all kids aren't any of those things. Yeah. And there are some excellent kids doing excellent things. Andrew McMahon, the next great songwriter of a generation, could be sitting in the class, and we're like, oh, he's writing poetry in class again. That's what a waste of time. But here we are looking at the poetry of a 15, 16-year-old and saying, wow, those are some amazing words he wrote that we can still relate to 25 years later. Maybe we could use this moment to say, what makes a great Andrew song?
So what I like doing when I'm talking about stuff is creating like a triplet. What three things really lead something to be awesome? So you're obviously oversimplifying, but you're creating something useful. So at Disney Imagineering, some of the Imagineers use a triplet that is a great Disney ride thrills you, it takes you somewhere unique, and it connects to something you already love. Right? So Space Mountain thrills you because it's a roller coaster, but it takes you in space and connects you to the themes and stories that you know and love, which is space, right? And then Star Wars does that even more. And the rides that people don't like are the ones that don't properly take you because they don't fully immerse or they don't really go anywhere. And the kids' rides that thrill more also do better as kids' rides. So with Andrew, here is my proposal of sort of the three things that sort of make what he does right. So it is his distinct sort of the something distinct about it, right? I think I talked about this a little bit before. So distinct language, right? Dark Blue, Cecilia and the Satellite, Cavanaugh Park. Then it is sort of this thematic consistency in which the song is able to wrap around the theme of the thing such that everything flows together and becomes more than the sum of the parts, which is very obvious when we think about how he talked about how he does his bridge, right? His bridge is reinforcing the core of the song. Yep. Cecilia and the Satellite is really doing that by every single thing feels good, right? It's all the same thing. It's him doing big things, and then all of a sudden there's something even bigger than everything he's done. And then the third thing I think that he does that's really good is he's able to take his own sound and make it a twist on the zeitgeist. There are lots and lots of other things we could say with it, but I think these are a useful three, right? We can think about how like Punk Rock Princess is one of his hits from that era, and it does all these things, right? We then think like Dark Blue and Mixtape does all those things, right? So, and then Cecilia and the Satellite. And Cecilia and the Satellite, if we think about like the zeitgeist, Cecilia and the Satellite is a very like trendy song. Right? It was a 2014 song. It comes out right before sort of that pop drop era where like they would have the chorus and then like this like dance beat after it, which he would have the oh after it. Yeah. So it's actually similar. I do not mean this in a negative way. It's similar to a Chainsmokers song. And also he also was coming out with this like positivity that existed in that time, right? So this is, you know, late Obama era. We have a lot of positivity that goes along in culture. That song comes out the same year that Best Day of My Life by American Authors comes out, right? And you can see that song, Andrew, fitting right next to American Authors and Chainsmokers. And it literally did on pop radio. And then you can see Dark Blue sitting right next to an Arctic Monkeys ride in the sort of late aughts, early 2010s ride. And then you can see Punk Rock Princess, you know, fitting along in all those things. And so I think this is such an interesting way to sort of, I love taking my things and being like, okay, what is it that is the reason for sort of this consistent success? And it's just his ability to bring this incredibly distinct, thematically intertwined lyrics, and then find a way to both be himself, but a part of what the world feels.
So you said, I want to restate what you said.
That's a long time. That's a long rant.
That's
Go for
okay.
it.
So you said it's distinct.
Distinct language, yeah.
Distinct language. It's intertwined.
Thematically intertwined, yeah.
Okay. And it's of the time.
And arguably, you can say this is actually a good way to like say almost why all artists are, right? It can explain why Olivia Rodrigo or The Weeknd or Kendrick Lamar is successful. But just because Andrew is so like a songwriter, I really like that idea of the thematic and the distinctness up top.
Yeah, I've never heard it put that way. That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I think that lots of times people act like, so there are obviously very generic or boring things that hit pop radio, but if you actually think about the pop radio songs that are the most successful, like if you look at an artist and you see their more successful song, It's usually actually fits that it's like actually quite distinct. It's quite narratively, like Little Nas X has some really distinct songs.
Yep.
Post Malone has some really distinct songs. The Chainsmokers, when they were coming through, had some really distinct songs. Linkin Park, with songs like Faint and In the End, especially in their era, are very distinct, right? Even Linkin Park calling their song Faint, like, is like something like distinct, and then was able to find their own sound. And it is just like this useful thing. And checklists are never going to make you write a really good song. But one of the things that I really like that people say, it's like, if you look at Disney rides and you see all the ones that went wrong, you're like, why didn't you use a checklist? If you look at a movie and you're like, movie story is defined more or less as a causal relation of events in which one moment should drive the next, and that the best stories involve change over time, such that the characters and or the world should be very different at the start than the end of it. Literally basic 101 story. You can literally go up to every Marvel movie and you can say the ones that go with 101 storytelling have over a 75% on Rotten, and the ones that don't are below it. So it's not that perfect, but the correlation is strong. And I think it's just this really interesting ways. And lots of people, again, like maybe people even listening right now, they're like, shut up, Troy. I'm like, no, we can have a sort of scientific mind. I'm not saying that the art doesn't matter.
Yeah, there's a formula.
And what I often like saying is like, no physicist is ever out there being like, yeah, so our new plane, it breaks the laws of physics. Now the headline might say that, but it doesn't break the law of physics. It found a new way to work with the formula of physics. And why psychology and physics are not exactly the same, there is a little bit of overlap in there. Wow, this turned into Troy stands on a soapbox. This turned into Troy's giving a talk at a conference.
Well, I invited you to, so
yeah,
great. I don't know. We kind of jumped around. We went from songwriting to lyrics, and we talked a little about the sound of the song. So, do you have a favorite part of the song or something? Like, this song was obviously really significant to you. Do you feel like you've already expressed what that thing was, or is there a reason that you chose this particular song? And I guess there was two questions in there: your favorite part of the song and what's special about it to you, and maybe they're one and the same.
It is special to me because it is a song that is literally written about the parks that have been important into my life. And as a person who still lives in California and still goes to those parks, it will always be relevant for that reason. I think it will always be relevant to me and many other people, because though it might be a slight exaggeration, the never finding the place to be totally happy, I think is something I will relate to, maybe not at the extremity of the lyric with the certainty, the completeness of it, but still that feeling. And my favorite sort of lines in it, just the start at Cavanaugh Park, I used to sit alone in the dark and dream, like that is the start of the song is so powerful for me.
I really love, so similar line, but it's toward the end. At Cavanaugh Park, where I used to think that this life would be good, and I would do things that I thought that I should, and no one's going to tear me down. I don't have a meaning that I assign personally to those lines necessarily. I just love the poetry there. And that's all I really want to say about those lines.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic Andrew song where the sadness and the grit and the hopefulness are all right next to each other.
Yep.
And I really, really love that in that song and in everything, right? Right. The older you get, often the more complicated your emotions become, or the way that you can enjoy things like bittersweet, or at least for some people that is the case. And I love all of it, everything, everywhere, all at once vibe of this song.
I've got a fun fact for you. You ready for a fun fact?
I am ready to have fun, Steve.
All right. Were you a fan, or did you know about the show Making the Band on ABC back about 20 years ago?
I'm familiar with the name, and that I think yep, that's it. Nope, didn't find anything in my brain.
No, that's all right. So, in a nutshell, that was the show that created O-Town, which is a boy band. So basically, Backstreet Boys, NSYNC were hitting big at the time. This was the year 2000. ABC decided to create their own boy band via reality show style. They basically brought a bunch of guys in that were great singers and great dancers, and then they whittled them down to 5. And the reason I'm telling you all this is because I read somewhere Cavanaugh Park is actually used in the season 1 finale of that show. And believe it or not, there was more than one season, but I've never seen an episode until recently. I went on this hunt online, and I'm getting better at this. I hunted down the actual the last episode of the first season of this show, Making the Band, because I wanted to know. I'm like, that doesn't sound right. Why would Cavanaugh Park be in that show? And especially with the timing. So I mentioned earlier that their very first album independently was released on November 4th, 2000, which had Cavanaugh Park on it. This show, the finale, was in September of 2000, so before they had released anything officially. But actually, for 2.5 minutes in the finale of this episode, Cavanaugh Park is playing in the background, just the piano.
Uh-huh.
Does it make you wonder, like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
So you got this 18-year-old kid. Did he sell it to ABC? Did somebody find it and say, "Hey, can we use it?" And he was like, "Yeah, whatever." I don't know. I'm always curious and fascinated about that. And you've probably heard me say this on the show before, but and that's one of those things that if I had like the past 20 years interview with Andrew, that's one of those things I'd throw in there. So how did Cavanaugh Park end up on Making the Band?
Okay.
And so,
well, you have your next time you're in Wilderness, you're going to do the thing you've never done before, which is he's going to be talking about the new Tilt album, and you're just going to be like, I have a question.
Yeah, I have a question. But
I have a question about Making the Band. Yeah.
Have you ever seen that show, Andrew? Because, yeah.
So one of the things I love talking to my students about, and your podcast is part of this, is whatever you love when you are 20 years old, you potentially will know more about it, even more about what is happening in that moment when you're 35, right? And that is so cool. Like, I wish somebody would have been like, Troy, you will know more about Andrew McMahon's songs, his process, him as a person over time. This thing, your fandom can grow. And I'm like, oh, wow, growing up doesn't seem so bad if I can love the thing I love already now more. And it's just in my other list of millions of things that people don't talk about because they don't think about people's psychology and, self evolving over time. And so thank you for contributing.
Yeah, that reminds me of something you said earlier that I wanted to touch back to. And I love what you said about no one taught you about growing up necessarily. You didn't hear that from anybody, what it would be like to grow up. And it's okay that you like different things and you feel differently, and that would be okay to change. I saw an interview with Andrew, kind of wrapping up the song discussion. In an Entertainment Weekly interview that I watched, a journalist asks Andrew about the lyrics. So, Andrew, do you feel like you've finally found a place where you can feel totally happy?
Yeah, I know about this.
It was kind of sweet in his response. He responded, he talked about how incredibly fortunate he is to have the positive relationships he has in his life. We all get older, we all grow up, and it's neat to look back on these things with whatever attitude we want, but usually it's gratitude, and it's that some of that's nostalgia, to look back in those times with our friends and those times we hung out in parks, and maybe we don't do those things anymore with those same people. But it was neat for him to at almost 40 years old at the time, to respond to a lyric that he wrote again when he was 16.
Yep.
Now, you mentioned that you don't listen to much before 2010 these days. So do you still listen to something corporate as an artist that you enjoy, or are you more of sounds like you're more of the modern Andrew fan?
So two answers to that. One is I still listen to a lot of it. I just listen to so much music that I'm listening to, on average, probably 75% of what I'm listening to is post 2010. Mm-hmm. I was always a Jax fan because I loved Something Corporate and I worshipped Something Corporate, but Jax was my band, right? I also liked the person who I was in high school, but I really sort of became my own self in college, which is when I went to Jax shows, and I got to see so many Jax Mannequin shows because I was in Orange County, and I'd see TV tapings and other things like that. But yeah, I think that more and more my favorite Andrew McMahon stuff is Andrew McMahon in the Wilderness. And just because it's more relevant to me at the time, I might say, like, if you did like that, like, I like Andrew McMahon at the Wilderness is a 9.7 out of 10. And Something Corporate for me at my height of Something Corporate fan was a 9.5 out of 10. And my height of Jack's Mannequin was a 9.9. Right. And so, like, there's like maybe to sort of like understand what that means. So when everybody says, what's your favorite band of all time? Or what's your favorite band? Like, it's a difficult question. But yes, I really, really love modern Andrew McMahon. I love The National. I love Marina. I love modern Death Cab. I've enjoyed actually post 2010 Fall Out Boy, which Patrick Stump calls mature bitterness sometimes. I just like a lot of that type of stuff. I really like Boy Genius a lot, and the people in that. So Phoebe Bridgers, and and also to quote a Chainsmokers song, I don't remember the exact line, but we beat to death that Blink-182 song in Tucson or whatever, right? I beat to death these pop punk things, and I have listened to them so much that the newness is useful for multiple reasons.
Yeah, I see. I could see that. Yeah, there's a lot of things I enjoy going back to.
Yeah.
So a little bit different. I follow the artists that I've always been with and what they're doing now. Like I still follow Fall Out Boy and whatever Dashboard's doing now, and even my 90s grunge bands, Bush, Candlebox, the bands that are still chugging after all these Foo Fighters. I was following Linkin Park until they stopped doing things, but I still follow what Mike Shinoda does.
Yep.
So I keep up on all those artist modern things. So a little bit different twist on that. I don't get into too many newer artists, let's say.
I have like nostalgia days. So like if I were to think about what playlist on Spotify I'm always listening to, it's mostly all the new stuff. But then one day, and it's a really good experience, I'll be like, I haven't listened to Armor for Sleep for 2 years. This next hour is going to be really good, right? And then I probably will have the same experience 2 years later.
Yeah, I've done that too.
Yeah, it's a great way, I think, to consume nostalgia, almost like rewatching a movie.
Exactly.
Which is also associated with mosh pits in 95 degree weather at Pomona, right? And it's great.
Well, is there anything about the song that we didn't cover? Anything else that you wanted to say about the song in particular?
I'm interested in the concept of cool. And so I actually have done follow-up research on the actual science of cool and what does it mean to feel cool and stuff. And in general, the definition in research is autonomously breaking the norm in a way that other people see as positive, right? So effing up in a way that makes him look cool is sort of like, that's the definition of cool. He's like breaking the norm by messing up. He's doing that. And that's a form of cool. But also there's a form of cool, which is you're breaking the norm in like a very positive or artistic way, right? There's like this mess up cool and then this artsy cool. And they are different, but they are very psychologically similar because you're just seeing someone as rebelling against a system. I can imagine sometimes myself being Andrew and sort of being like jealous of this person, Adam, who is like this traditional high school cool while being this other version of cool. And I remember in high school, I always called myself popular adjacent because I wasn't cool for high school because I wasn't like the popular kids. But then I went to a youth leadership awards camp during high school, and I was freaking cool there. And I was like, oh, when I go to college, it's going to be just these nerds like me. And I am a cool nerd. And I can't wait for this experience. And so I sort of relate to that and also feel jealous sometimes of like mainstream popular people. Or like, there's so many like mainstream popular nerds right now, and I'm not this like really nice buttoned up polo wearing person, right? The popular millennials became that. And I'm also not like the evil tech bro from Silicon Valley. And so I don't really have sort of that aesthetic that really demands the full audience and makes me so famous. And I actually personally have always sort of been in the shadow of those people, right? So like my work is used by Adam Grant. My work is used by the Obama administration. I was a a student of one of the most famous behavioral economists. I was a student of one of the most famous psychologists, flat out, Elizabeth Loftus. But I never rose to that level, just in part because I wasn't that type of person. I really love them, but they're more straight scientific mind people, or like some of the Imagineers that I've worked with, more straight art, or straight, actually more business. A lot of the Imagineers are very business type creatives.
Yeah.
And just always feeling in that shadow. And to quote Fall Out Boy, and I like this line, which is, some princes don't become kings. And I sort of always have seen myself as the person who's the little prince, looking at the atoms of the world, being like, this is my lane. And I've loved Andrew of pretty much, he stayed in that lane all the time. He's there on the bill with the big popular people, but he stays popular adjacent.
Well put. Where can you point us on your website? Where would be the best place to go to learn more about the work that you do?
So the two ways to find out about my work is to go to troy-campbell.com. And then if you just go on the homepage, I have some of my favorite things linked there. Mm-hmm. But the other best way to find me is actually just to Google my name and a keyword. So Google Troy Campbell Disney, Troy Campbell storytelling, Troy Campbell emo, Troy Campbell fandom, Troy Campbell activism, Troy Campbell psychology, Troy Campbell behavioral science, whatever term is what it is, that'll lead you to your space. In part because one of the ways that I sort of exist in the world is less of my own platform, at least for the moment. Yeah, I'm a part of a lot of other people's stories, whether those are podcasts, whether that is research, whether those are initiatives, and that's nice, right?
Yeah.
And literally the atoms of the world, Adam Grant, are talking about my stuff, but I am not Adam.
I started watching one of your videos. It looks like you do some tutorials on using art and marketing and things like that. So I was watching one of those videos of yours. So
Thanks.
Check more out. So you've told me that you're interested in the power of lyrics to capture ideas, and you've done a little exercise related to that.
Yeah.
You want to share that with us?
So I really love the idea that lyrics can capture ideas, right? So Rachel Bloom, the creator of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, she says songs are like little musical essays, and they're a really good way to say, here's what I'm thinking about. And I really also like that because it can capture sort of emotions. And so sometimes I'll have students write things to capture themselves, their brands, how they're feeling. Maybe I wrote a lyric one time to explain psychological concepts like, I'm looking for a different version of me, somebody in the past that I used to be. And then it goes on. And it's like, this is loss aversion and identity loss aversion. And then we talk about that in class. But here's the thing. I recently was inspired at a fan event with Andrew McMahon when he said something, and I'm like, I want to capture what he just said as an idea because I relate to it, and I think he said something interesting. Mm-hmm. And probably many of you have actually heard him say this. So he was at a fan event, and when it was a Zoom fan event I was at, and he gets on and he says this line, "There's a lot of familiar faces here." And I was like, oh my gosh, that's powerful, right? And I've been one of those familiar faces. He actually pointed us out in the crowd one time in 2006 because we got to so many of his shows. And I was also thinking about like, oh my gosh, this is the relationship of artist and audience. My art side's going off, but this is also social psychology, mm-hmm. what he likes, what we mean to him, what he means to him. And I'm like, I need to capture whatever this is. And me as a person that is also on stage a lot, I'm sort of relating to sort of that idea. And also our fans have grown, his fans have grown up, my students have grown up. It's just all this interesting thing. Mm-hmm. So if you'll indulge me, I will share some of the lyrics and I'll talk this through and how we do it.
All right.
So it is in the voice of Andrew, sort of like inspired by Andrew, but it's really a lot of different things. And the point is not, when I'm ever writing lyrics, I call it Lyrics Lab, it's not to write amazing lyrics, it's to use the power of lyrics to capture an idea. So here we go, familiar faces. Verse 1, I went to a doctor who looked kind of familiar and a bit younger than me. He told me to drink a little bit less and that he'd been going to my gigs since 2003. He had been in the front of a empty stadium for my band's first radio show. I told him I was lost in stress till I walked out and saw that first row. right? And I started writing these lyrics, and I was thinking, like, some of my students now are actually successful professionals who like actually do things that I like and or collaborate with me. And now some of Andrew's fans are his doctors. And I thought that was just like this interesting way to get at it. And so the verse continues. I was feeling uninspired, so I went for a creative pickup at a local coffee shop, where I met some baristas who played my new song and poured my shot. They told me that I'd inspired them to open up and follow their dream. As I took a sip, I told them, I think, for me, you kind of did the same thing. And then the chorus would say, I'm not going to do the Andrew OOOs, but he'd be like, oh, 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 I wrote songs about growing up and watched you grow up too. Oh, 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 oh. Under the dancing lights, I felt your glow, and it helped me through. These lonesome cold nights in all these new and different places, you always make it feel like home with all your familiar faces, right? And so we're capturing this idea of what the relationship is with the fans and other things like that. And so after this, I was thinking, okay, so I've wrote this first verse. What would Andrew say in this situation? He would say, like, well, I've captured the general idea. What more am I worried about? What more am I thinking about? Which is what he said on Lying on the Hood of Your Car episode with you. And I was thinking, one thing I know Andrew wants is like he wants to be relevant right now, right? He still wants young fans. I want to be relevant to Gen Z when I teach them and design for them. Andrew wants, I think he's been excited in shows recently where people come with the black X on their hand, which means they're young fans enjoying it, right? They can't drink, so they get the black X. And so it's like, how do I capture that, or how do I explore that? And so I wrote these lyrics, which was, I saw a punky kid who looked kind of familiar, but 20 years younger than me. I was feeling kind of old until they turned around and I saw the logo on their tee. Their Hey Andrew told this songwriter to keep making tunes and singing them from this stage to the misfits from my generation and some misfits half my age. And then it would go on to the chorus again. And so I'm going to talk about the bridge in a second. First of all, I want to point out so far that Andrew probably wouldn't be this direct. He would be a little bit more poetic than this. So again, we're not trying to really write an Andrew song. We're just trying to use the inspo from him. But to use some inspo from him, what does Andrew do in all his choruses? All his bridges, is he's trying to recapture the idea of the song. So what is this really about? What is left unsaid, or what can I really punch home? And so in the bridge, I have it. It says, it would have just said, with all your familiar faces. Jump into bridge. Familiar because you've been coming for decades and singing along. Familiar because you just feel all the same things in the song, right? And so now we've got this idea of what familiar can mean, this multi-narrative storytelling. And then to finish out this bridge, I was thinking, like, I'm never going to write a perfect Andrew song, but what can I use from an inspiration of how Andrew uses art? And we've talked about this idea that Andrew talks about big things a lot. He loves these huge images, skies, satellites, and it's like these big things in transit, in motion. And I'm like, okay, what can I use that as a constrained creative thing to get something else to hit this home? So I'll do the thing that I think hits it home, and then I'll say the chorus one last time. Here it is. As these ageless images fly through my mind, I see you in thousands of frames, pictures of so many people I all know, but only know a few names. And so I like that idea of the ageless images flying through his mind, this largest thing, and we're all familiar even if he doesn't know our name. And then just to repeat that chorus really quick, it would be, I wrote songs about growing up and watched you grow too. Under these dancing lights, I felt your glow and it helped me through. These lonesome cold nights in all these new and different places, you always made it feel like home with all your familiar faces. So that is a song exercise to sort of capture the unique relationship that artists often have with their audiences and what they mean about time to better understand this thing, and also sort of grab some ideas, like literally lines for an artist or a person on a stage to say, familiar faces, right? I don't know all your names, but I feel like I know you, right? That more or less is something that I'll probably now say on the stage after doing this exercise. One time when I was writing something about science, I came up with the line, because the art is the spark and the science is the kerosene-coated wood. And this line of science being kerosene-coated wood for a creative has been like this incredible metaphor that I've been able to use to convince creatives, which are often very not interested in using science, that this thing exists for their spark.
So you've done this exercise in class with students, right?
Yeah. And so like, for instance, I had a student one time about she was a B plus student, and she was trying to understand who she's what, right? And she's like, and like, it was this way for her to sort of like understand her sort of value and things. Mm-hmm. And I do lots and lots of different things. Sometimes I'll do things where I'll have people just write a song in the voice of their artist that deals with a certain existential thing. And it's really fun because you'll have like a student writing a song in the voice of Kendrick Lamar and Tame Impala in the same class. Uh-huh. And like, you'll see how even though they aesthetically do something or they have something different to say on it, you can use that same form to capture these ideas about whatever you're talking about.
Right on. Well, I love that you're not only introducing the lyrics of Andrew McMahon to a younger generation, but that you're inspiring students to write their own lyrics based upon how they're feeling.
Yeah.
Just an interesting way to encourage students to dig in a little bit more to themselves. I appreciate that.
And if you want one easy recommendation on how do you ever use lyrics, there's two very simple type of songs that you can immediately start writing with one of two phrases. And they are two famous Disney songs, but they're also the famous like everything song. And it's a I want song or an I am song, right? So an I want song is that Disney song, right? I want to be better, right? I want to be the princess. I want to find out my destiny. Uh-huh. And Andrew has I want songs, right? Uh-huh. I want to make a life, right? He literally has I want songs. And I am songs are really useful. And so I want songs are useful to understanding your wants or sometimes writing them in the voice of your audience or consumer. And then an I am song is a song where you're saying, what is your identity? This is really useful for an individual or their personal brand or a brand themselves, right? So we get the I am songs, right? Which is I am Moana, I'm a savage, or I am 21 and invincible, right? So Andrew has some I am songs. Yep. And what's really cool is you can teach students the idea of an I am song or, designers. And then you can say, what's your favorite I am song that you know? And then they can just edit the lyrics of their own favorite artists to find out something that's true about themselves or the company that they work for. And it works actually very, very, very quickly because you're teaching them something new, but in the context of something they know, love, and literally have creative energy around.
Very cool. Well, Troy, thank you so much for joining the podcast tonight and sharing this with us. I think you brought a really unique perspective, and I knew you would, based on our conversations online and the things you shared with me through Instagram. So I really appreciate your help in not only understanding Cavanaugh Park a little bit better, but just kind of digging into Andrew's songwriting and lyrics in general and going through this exercise with you. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. And I think I've said this multiple times probably on this episode before, but like, you help people deepen their love for something they really love. And that is an incredible service to provide for people.
I appreciate you saying that. Thank you so much. If anybody would like to get in touch with me, direct message me on Instagram, email somethinginthe.wilderness@gmail.com. Again, thank you, Troy, for joining us. And I just love how you're inspiring, again, younger students with Andrew's lyrics and sharing them through your lessons. I'm running out of clock, and that ain't a shock. Some things never do change.
That's a pretty good ending.